Hello guys, welcome to SoapUI web service testing tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about the custom SoapUI properties, and we'll also understand about the property transfer in SoapUI. So property transfer in SoapUI is very important concept, and you will be utilizing property transfer a lot when you are designing your end-to-end test cases in SoapUI. So let's get started and understand a bit more about the custom SoapUI properties and the property transfer. So in last tutorial, we have already seen about the custom SoapUI properties. In this tutorial, we will see or we'll understand a bit more about the properties in SoapUI. So we have seen that properties can be defined at different levels like global, project, test suite, test case, and test steps. Now, what is the difference between all these different levels? So basically, if you are defining a property at the global level, it will be available across your project, okay, across all the projects that you define in this SoapUI or in this SOAP instance. So for example, you have the global properties here, define all the global properties, and you create a project called calculator, and then you create a project called airline booking. Those global properties will be accessible through all these projects and in all the projects. So that's basically the highest level property. You can understand it basically as a root or a tree structure wherein the global property sits at the top, and that can be accessed through all the leaves or nodes, right? Then comes the project level property. So if you have defined a project level property, custom property in the calculator project, so like A, B, and C, so these properties can be accessed through all these test suites. So sanity test suite can access all these properties. So if you simply want to access, so for example, in sanity test, you have a test case and there is a SOAP request. And if you want to access the property from here, so for example, from this, for this node here, so if you just right click and click on get data, go to get data, you can see that you can access global property, you can access the project property A, B, C, and you can access the test suite property, right? So any property that is defined in the test suite is specific to that particular test suite. Any property that is defined in a test case is specific to that test case and cannot be accessed through any other test case. Any property that is defined in the test step is basically for that particular test step level or that particular test step. So that's how the hierarchy is. So if you define any property at the test suite sanity test, it can't be accessed in the regression tests 1, 2 or regression tests. So basically the highest level node is the global property, then comes the project property, then your test suite, test cases, and test steps. All right, so that's a bit more about the property hierarchy and how you will be able to access. So it's very important to understand, because sometimes you might be wondering why I'm not able to access a property which I define in the regression test suite here, right? So that's the reason, because that property which has been defined in the regression test suite, you won't be able to access it in another test suite. You have to define it at the project level to access that particular property in all the test suites. Now, when you are designing your test case or designing your automation framework in SoapUI, you have to basically understand what all properties will be shared across multiple test suites. So for example, if you have the authorization data for particular web services, so it's better to define it either at the project level or at the global SoapUI level, right? If you have multiple projects which are using same authentication data, if it is specific to project, define it at the project level, so it is accessible to from all the test suites. But if there is a particular property which is very specific to a test case or a test suite, define it as at the test suite level. So it's basically as per need basis and how that particular property needs to be accessed across the project and across the test suite, define those properties. So that's a bit more about the properties. Now let's go ahead and understand the property transfer. So what exactly is property transfer? So for example, here in sanity test, so let's go ahead and see this regression test. I will not use sanity test. So in regression test, you can see that I have two test steps, add, and add is a SOAP request. Let me add another SOAP request for multiply. All right, and I'll add multiply SOAP request. Okay, so now I have add SOAP request and I have a multiply SOAP request. So basically what happens is, what I'll do is I'll just rename this. I'll say end-to-end test. So this is very simple test, just to give you a brief understanding about the property transfer and how you can utilize property transfer to design your end-to-end test. In the actual scenario, you will be having a lot of a complex web service which will have lots of different requests, and then you will be getting the response. From those response, you will be picking up the data and passing it to the another web service. And most common of all these is passing the session ID. So for example, you log into a particular portal and then you get a session ID. You pass on that session ID to the next request to add cart or to add items to the cart. So you'll use that session ID in the next request, which is add items to the cart. So that's where you will need the property transfer to use that session ID from the first web service response and pass it to the another service. So we'll try to demo the same concept using the add and multiply SOAP request that we have here. So for example, in this add request, you see, right, I'll remove these properties here. I'll just make it as question mark as it is in the default, right? Or maybe just for now, just let me send the request and the response is 4, right? So now what if I need to get this response in the result 4 and then pass this response automatically to these two integers? So 4 in int A and 4 in int B automatically, and then multiply these, right? So I just want to pass 4 here and then send this request, and I want to see what the response is. Okay, so response should be 16. So now I don't want to do all this manually, right? So as of you can do all these things manually, but if you're using SoapUI, the most important thing to do is to automate all this so that you don't have to manually get the value from the response and then put it into the another request and then hit that request, right? So that's where you will need the property transfer. So to add a property transfer, just right click on the test step, click on add step, and click on property transfer. All right, so I'll just leave it as property transfer, and what I want to do is I want to get the result from the request or from the response of the add request and pass it on to the multiply int A and int B, right? So how you can do it? So I have added the property transfer step. Now I'll add the transfers. Okay, so I'll say transfer A. Okay, and from where I need to transfer? I need to transfer from add what property? Response. So I want to take the value from this response that you can see here. All right, and then what language? So you have multiple options here to choose what language. So at the moment you see that it is an XPath, but you can select XQuery or JSON path as well. So we'll take XPath, and then where you want to transfer this property. So you want to transfer it in the multiply and in the request. So I want the value that comes in the result to transfer it to the target multiply in the request and populate it at a particular XPath. Okay, so that's what I need to do. So in order to do that, the first thing is you need to work out the namespaces, right? So find out what namespaces you are having. Okay, so if you click on these this NS icon here, it will automatically populate the namespaces that are available, right? But if you closely look here, let me highlight it a bit. So if you closely look this response here, right, and this is the namespace below which this add result response comes. All right, so this 4 is basically coming from this namespace. So I just need to define this namespace http://tempuri.org. okay, so let's go back to property transfer and remove this first namespace and just leave the other one as is there. And now what I want to do is I want to see where this particular value is. So how you can define the XPath? Just 2/ and then say namespace 1 and then colon. So the root is add response, so just say add response and then /ns1 colon, and the child is add result, and then what you are getting is you are getting the text out of it. Okay, so that will basically get what the value in the add result tag. All right, now if you open the multiply request, okay, so in the multiply request you have this temp as the root, and then below temp you have the int a and int b tags where you need to pass on these values, right? So where do you see this temp here? That's what your namespace is, right? So this is your, this you see XMLNS, that's namespace temp. So that's what you need to define in the property transfer, and this one you can ignore. Okay, so I'll say declare ns1 for target as well, and where you want to transfer, we'll just quickly write it. I'll open the multiply. Let me move this a bit here. Okay, now //ns1, and then you need to say, oh sorry, you can do it as temp because the tag here is temp, and say temp colon multiply /temp colon int a, right? So on this tag, on this particular temp int a, the value 4 will get populated when you do this property transfer. So let me remove these values, okay, and then try to run property transfer and see if it works successfully, right? So after you have done these changes, I'll uncheck these boxes here, so I don't want to set null on missing source, and then run this. Okay, now you can see the property 4 or the value 4 has been set in int a, and even in the logs you can say transferred value is 4. Okay, let me highlight it a bit. You can see value 4 has been set here. Okay, now how to set the value in int b as well? Let's add another property transfer. Okay, so you can simply say add a new property transfer, or you can copy the selected property transfer and rename it. Okay, so I'll say copy the same property transfer. I'll say transfer b, and instead of copying it in the tag a of, I'll copy it in the b, right? Let me expand this. Okay, so in the first transfer it's going into the tag a or int a, and in the second transfer the value is going into int b as highlighted here. Okay, in the first one it's going in int a, in the second one it's going into int b. So now what's happening is, in first transfer it's getting that particular value that's coming from the add response and populating it into the int a, temp int a of the multiply request. In the second transfer it's getting the same value from the response of add request and populating it into the request of the multiply int b. Alright, so now let's run again and see how it works. So now you can see that another 4 has been populated. Right, so now you can see both the values here are populated as 4. Okay, so now your property transfer is working as expected, as you can see here in the logs. Okay, so if I expand it here a bit, so now you can see transfer a, transferred value was 4, and transferred value for b was 4 as well. Okay, so let's close all these and try to run this end-to-end test case. So now, to give you a brief, what we are doing is we are getting a value from this particular response, from add response, and then automatically passing this value in the add result response to the multiply in the int a and int b. Let me remove these and change it to the question mark and close it. Right, so now these are the question mark. I'll remove the response as well, so there is no value there. And now run the end-to-end test case. So I'll remove this test. Yeah, okay, so let's run this end-to-end test case. Right, so it has finished and executed. So if you see the log here, so add has executed, property transfer has been performed, transfer a and transfer b. If you open this, you can see the transferred values are 4 and multiply went through successfully and the response is 16. Now let me change it to some other value. So I'll change the value in add to 5 and 5 and rerun the end-to-end test. Okay, and see the response again. So it has finished again successfully, and in the response, if you see, the multiply response is 100. Okay, so what happened is basically in the add 5 and 5 it went to 10, and then in multiply 10, if you see here in the request, int a got 10, int b got 10, and the multiplication result of 100 is displayed. So basically that's how the property transfer will work in SoapUI. So this is very brief introduction about the property transfer, and this is very, very important to understand. The core concept of property transfer will remain same. It doesn't matter what web service you are testing, it will be same concept, same configuration, whether you want to pass the session ID or you want to pass any other particular information in the web service. It's basically will be the same concept. You will be creating the transfers from the source response, from the web service response, and then passing it to some other request. So that's pretty much all about the additional properties or additional concept about SoapUI properties and property transfer in SoapUI. Thank you very much for watching.